Thank you very much for joining me this morning. First talk of the day, and you've made it on Mother's Day all the way across the hall to the analogue stage for my talk on SuperPanos. So, my name is Dave Faulkner. I'm the inventor of the TYCH camera and owner of Alfie Cameras. We've got a stand over here today. I'm a design engineer by profession. I learned my trade in consumer products and medical devices. But for many years, I've been a passionate film photographer, and that's what I've done in my spare time until more recently, and now it's become more of my profession. So for this talk, I'm going to take you through a creative film photography technique that I'm calling SuperPanos. We're going to cover what is and what is not a SuperPano, the types of cameras that work well for SuperPanos, what film choice will help you make a SuperPano, how you actually go through the process of making one, and also I'm going to cover how you scan them as well. And of course, we've got lots of great examples of images for you to look at. So what is a SuperPano? So it's a made-up or portmanteau blend word, a sort of mash-up of superimposed and panorama. Superimposed, your dictionary definition is something that's placed or laid over something else, typically so that both things are still evident. In photography, it can be more than two images superimposed. And panorama, it's a view of the whole region surrounding the observer. So you're probably all familiar with multiple exposure photography. It's quite a common technique in both analog and digital photography. And I prefer to do them in camera, analog obviously, rather than resorting to Photoshop techniques. Try to avoid getting my head in Photoshop for too long, much rather be out doing photography. But this technique represents the superimposed part of a SuperPano. What makes these images different is the complexity they offer the viewer. Your brain has to put in extra effort to understand what the image is showing you. These are some great examples. They're all on film, taken by our customers with TYCH cameras. Tristan, who's Massat Photos on Instagram, he specialises in multiple exposure photographs. He's got an extensive travel photography portfolio on his Instagram feed. Recommend taking a look at his work. There's a couple of images here of his, one from Ukraine during the war, and another from Warsaw. He's quite prolific in his travelling. Andrew, or BuzzOven3, as he is on Instagram, loves going to music gigs. He photographs usually as multiple exposures, lots of high ISO film work, and he does artists small and big, from Dua Lipa to Tripping Daisy. But I hope you agree that the images are quite engaging. That multiple exposure element really adds something. So according to Google AI, these are the factors that make multiple exposure images visually and emotionally engaging. And there's a lot of definitions around these different points, but I'm just going to hone in on a couple that really resonate for me. So that visual depth and dimensionality, layering images adds a sense of three-dimensional texture and volume, making the photograph feel more dynamic and immersive. And complexity, multiple exposures allow you to juxtapose your images and create hidden messages and hidden stories within that image. You're essentially combining multiple images where you might tell one story, one image, into your image, and making the viewer stop and really analyze your image. And also that surrealism and abstraction. So one of the things that SuperPanos lend them to is creating a very surreal panoramic image, and that really shows through in some of the examples we've got. What is not a SuperPano? So this might be a super panoramic image, it's wide, expansive view, but it's not what I'm calling a SuperPano. It's done digitally, it's been stitched together in Photoshop, it's precision, everything's been perfectly done, nicely leveled. So who in the audience has tried creating a panorama image by stitching digital photos together? Yeah, fair few of you. Good fun. But when I do it, I end up spending almost as much time in Photoshop as I did out in the field taking the image. It's not what I'm about. Anyone tried it on film? Just the one at the back, Chris. Bit more challenging on film. Getting that, if you want the precision, it really can be a challenge, and you end up having to crop your images quite a lot to really get a panoramic image that really stitches together. Have you tried a window frame panorama? So it's exactly as we imagine in this panoramic photograph, taken on a continuous strip of film, and each frame follows on one from the other, resulting in an effect that looks like a window frame. So this is London skyline. I'm not worried about doing this technique with precision. I like to do these handheld, letting go of that perfection and accepting the slightly disjointed look between them. Just for me, that adds a bit more to the image, but also the process of doing it. But what happens when you combine all of these techniques together, superimposing a panoramic image with a window frame style? So this was the first SuperPano that I saw. It was taken by one of our customers, Steve Schaub. He's an artist in the USA. It goes under the Instagram tag of Even Steve. And once your mind has interpreted the image and gotten over its initial visual complexity, there's a lovely, beautiful intentionality behind this image. The model's deliberately positioned on the left in beautiful sunshine, looking towards the sun. The mountains in the distance, but with the observer in shadow, looking out on the scene. And for me, it's a really engaging scene. And when he first shared it with me, I was on my phone and I was like, I need to see this on a big screen. And when I got home, I looked at it on the big screen and it really was like, wow, that's a beautiful effect he's created. And this was taken on one of our cameras, a TYCH Plus. But other cameras will work well for SuperPanos. So what sort of camera do you need to make this work? So you need a camera that allows both multiple exposures and partial frame advance. In theory, most manual cameras should allow this, but in practice, it can be pretty tricky. If you're trying to effect a partial wind on whilst holding down a rewind button on the bottom of your camera, you've got to understand how your wind mechanism works for that to actually be successful. And actually, there are some cameras that it's a lot easier on. So there's a plethora of 3D printed cameras. They might seem to tick all the right boxes, but you probably want one with optical glass rather than a pinhole. Sorry, Han. The reason being, you're taking so many exposures to build up a SuperPano, and if your exposures are in the 30 seconds, a minute, you're going to be there a while. You're going to need more than the coffee to get through all those exposures. So having a camera with optical glass can be great, gets your exposure times down to fractions of a second and allows you to really enjoy the process. You need complete control of the film winding, so no interlock between the shutter and the indexing of the film and the shutter release. So indexing means when you take a picture, the camera forces you to advance the film and won't allow another shot to be taken until it's in the position of the next frame. You need a camera that allows you to break that rule, do a partial advance and create that multiple exposure overlap. Multiple exposure capable cameras that still force the indexing won't allow you to do a SuperPano. Which cameras would I recommend? The TYCH, obviously, it's a great camera for this. Holga have a whole plethora of cameras that work well. There are 3D printed cameras that will support this technique as well. There's a couple of UK-based makers of cameras that have models that will work for this. And even some vintage 120 cameras will do the job for you as well. With the vintage cameras, you do need to look out for the way that their winding mechanisms work. some of the sort of 6x6 folders have an interlock that stops you taking another frame until you've advanced the film a little way. So you can still do an overlapping multiple exposure, but you don't have as much control about how much overlap you might want to achieve. And having that indication of how far you've advanced the frame can be a real advantage. So a camera that clicks as you advance, like the lomography Dyna F, can really help. You can kind of count the clicks to get a feel for how far you advance. The TYCH cameras actually have a quarter frame marker on their indicator. So the white marker does 1/2 frame, and there's a hidden black line there that if you look closely, you can see a quarter frame mark as well. And the vintage cameras, if you're going to go that route, you're going to have to work out how far each turn of that knob is advancing on the film, and some sticky tape and marker pen is going to help you get some good ideas of what's going on with your camera so you can achieve a good effect. Another example here. So partial overlap of a SuperPano rather than a full overlap or extreme overlap is a lot easier to execute, can be quite effective as well. This photographer Justin, who's Sad Maficio on Instagram, he's done literally 3 images with a partial overlap that have turned what could have been quite an ordinary holiday snap into something a bit more engaging that asks you to question why they've made the image like that. He's used one of the best films for the technique as well, which is Kodak Portra 400. It's so forgiving on poor exposure. If you do multiple exposures and you haven't quite got the exposure right, you haven't adjusted for the fact you're doing multiple exposures, Portra will let you get away with it. But what else makes a good pano film, SuperPano film? Negative films are really where it's at if you're learning this technique. Color negatives tend to work well. The color in the image can help the viewer identify the subject more easily. Black and white works fantastically, but you need a clear subject with high contrast, help the viewer interpret what's going on in the image. Slide film generally doesn't work so well, but I've got some good examples later to kind of challenge that. The slide film doesn't handle the multiple exposures quite as well. It's easier to end up with overexposed image or too dense a negative that then makes the scanning challenging. But there's nothing to stop you trying it. If you want to start with this technique, I'd recommend going color negative first, learn what you're doing, and then experiment and toy with it. Ilford HP5 Plus, Kodak TYCH 400, Portra 400 we've already mentioned, Kodak Gold, Ultramax, Fuji 400, is it Kodak? Depends whether you're buying expired or not. Lomography, color negative films, there's a range of them out there, but a good quality color negative film, you will probably get exciting results first attempts. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try the other films, just adds to the challenge. This example is from a Japanese photographer called Tak Iwasaki, who's Takezo on Instagram. It's a really intriguing scene, a kite flying festival in Japan, and he's done it on Ektachrome, and he's done a partial overlap, but you can see that overexposure starting to happen in the images where they overlap. It's starting to lose a little bit of detail, but it still works as an image. It's really nice. Oh, everything's paused. There we go. So, how are you going to make your SuperPano? So, if you're starting out and you're standing in one spot, is the easiest way to do it. My son took this video of me making a SuperPano in a local landmark near where we live. Take your images from left to right, typically, because your camera's advancing the film in the way that will work for that. I've not actually got a camera that advances the film the other way, so I don't know whether if your camera goes the other way, whether you want to go from right to left. It's for some of you to find out maybe. The simplest approach is staying in one spot. Decide on what sort of overlap you want to do. Know what your camera's going to do with film advance before you want to start doing this. So maybe with an old film, just check what your camera's doing with film advance, and if I want to do a quarter frame, do I just do the wheel this far, maybe make some markings with some masking tape on your camera. Do you need to underexpose? So generally depends on how many layers you intend to add to your picture. If you're just doing a partial overlap, there's no problem. You can just let the camera run on auto and it will cope with the exposure. The latitude of the film will deal with the multiple exposure, absolutely no problem. But when you start layering lots and lots of images on top of each other, you probably want to start underexposing your shots a little bit. Give the film a bit more chance to not get too dense, because the problem will be when you come to scan that film later, it gets really challenging. If you want to achieve a precise overlap, it's probably going to be easiest in post-processing to actually have scanned separate images and do them in Photoshop. But if you want to let go of that precision and do it in camera, I'd really recommend trying that. It's quite liberating and an exciting thing to do. It needs a bit of planning to make sure your final image is balanced. If you want to try different approach, rather than just standing in a spot and doing a panorama of the view in front of you, to trying to tell a panoramic story. It's a really great process. I only recently started trying this out, and rather than creating a continuous view, you're trying to create a panoramic image that tells a story that, for me, was I've got an example coming up that's quite meaningful for me, but it can work really well, especially if you have a central subject, but it needs a lot more planning. You need to have understood how that process works in the camera you're using, especially if you want to make sure, right, I want that subject to be 2 frames into my pano, and then the rest of the story 2 frames to the right of it. So this is my example of that story. It's my local high street. We have a small, vibrant little high street. It's not the main bit of the town. It has lots of little shops. And I went there with a specific intention of trying to capture the different shop fronts and some of the vibrancy of that high street. It was a bit challenging because not everyone wanted to pose in my photos, but I got a few people. And we ended up with this quite big pano, and I could have probably gone on twice as long, but very difficult to present one twice as long. That was really told a story that was great for me. So this is my local community where I go along here, and it's got my barbers, it's got where I go and get my butchers to go and get my meat, get my shoes repaired at the end here. And there's just, I don't go to this pub, but it had the name of the little town that has all these great shops in it. I've got another slide film example for you here. So this is from Yoshita Goto. He's Lomo Gochin on Instagram. And he shot this with Fuji Velvia, so thank you, Fuji, for the colours, which are beautiful. He's telling a really simple story of seafront life here with the fisherman, and you've got the musician who's enjoying the sunshine, and it just really engages me. I love the colours, and the story it tells really draws me in. That was taken on a Lomo LC wide, so you notice that the window frame effect is less apparent because you've got that full frame overlap going on. Another great example of storytelling from Tamara, who's Task 77 Photograph on Instagram. This is on Fuji Sensia, but she's cross-processed it to get these vivid pink colours. And very engaging self-portrait. It's of her hometown. She's got herself in the centre and then different aspects of her hometown panoramically off to the sides. I think this took quite a lot of planning for her to get it right. She might have had a few attempts, but executed really well. When I was trying out this technique, doesn't always go to plan. I had great expectations for this SuperPano. I envisaged a panorama of the fairground rides from our local park during the Donkey Derby. The end result is quite striking, it's complex, there's lots to look at, didn't quite live up to my vision. However, within the bigger pano, there's actually two successful images that, well, I quite like. If I centre on the ghost train, simplifies the story that's going on. There's more recognisable features, the dodgems and the Wild West ride and the ghost train itself. And I had a composition that I liked. And then the other end of the image had a vertical pano of the Ferris wheel and the other spinny, vomit-inducing ride that I really liked as well, just the colours, and it really said a lot about the day in the sunshine that I'd enjoyed. And this one was done on Kodak Gold, again with an TYCH. So, hope you enjoyed some of those examples, but how do you scan your SuperPanos? So most labs are going to scan individual frames, and that's going to leave you having to stitch them together yourself. Automatic machines that some of the labs use can miss frames or scan with fixed gaps, so you might miss parts of your pano. You can get away with it because of the overlapping nature. You can take those scans and you can piece them together in Photoshop and get something quite striking. Most of my colour examples are combinations from lab scans. But scanning at home is kind of easier to get that whole pano as you intended it. Digital camera scans might need a bit of stitching depending on whether you want to give up resolution or not, because you've got to move the camera far back to get the whole pano in. This is my setup for photographing the next example, and I've used a tablet as a light box, a pixelator to hold my negative flat, and then I've got my digital camera with a macro lens mounted so that I can get a good exposure on that. And that's taken the whole image as one. But flatbed scanners are really where it's at if you want to scan your SuperPanos easily and capture the whole image every time. But it can still be challenging. But if you've got an Epson at home, you're probably all set for trying this technique. So this is the image from that video clip of the airship hangar in Farnborough, taken on a TYCH again, and I deliberately didn't keep my camera level. I wanted to create a bit more confusion in the image as I went round and get more lines going at different angles. It actually, at one end of the image, there's a portrait of my son as well, so it's quite nice, but he didn't want to be in the PowerPoint. But the image did suffer from overexposure, and that gave me a more dense negative. Black and white film is so forgiving, but I did notice that a little bit of detail was lost when compared to the high street SuperPano that had less overlap on the images and less density on the negatives. And then you can really go to town on the overlaps. This is a scene from Poldhu Beach in Cornwall. I did adjust this for underexposure when making the SuperPano, so I deliberately made the shutter speed faster so that I didn't get too dense negative, but I still had a very dense negative, which I couldn't scan at home and get good results, but the lab were able to get good results, and this was stitched from the lab scans. So I had to piece it together in Photoshop, but quite a pleasing result. Really enjoy this image. And we were staying with friends, shared it with them, and they said it was lovely to see their local beach turned into a piece of art. Another example from Cornwall, I suffer from vertigo, and walking this cliff path was quite disorienting, and I wanted to try and capture that. So I decided to tilt as I did my SuperPano and create a little bit of unsteadiness in the image that, for me, this makes me a bit unsteady. It gives me that vertigo feeling again. So I love this image. Okay, what we've covered. We've covered what is and is not a SuperPano. We've covered cameras that work for SuperPanos. Obviously the TYCH is great. Come and take a look afterwards if you like. Film choice. Color negatives are usually the easiest thing to start with, but almost any film will work for this. Start with color negatives if you're just trying it out, and you'll get lovely results. Making a SuperPano, basics, left to right with a bit of overlap, always works. If you're in a beautiful scene, you'll get something impactful that will be lovely to see emerge. And scanning the SuperPanos, flatbed scanners are king, but I don't have a flatbed scanner. I'm getting results that are really pleasing to me from digital scanning, from piecing together my lab scans when they come back from development. And I'd just like to finish up with, if you haven't seen our new camera that we are launching at the show, we're doing a new box camera that engages you and completely immerses you in the whole photographic process, from taking and making the image to developing the film in the back of the camera. And we're planning to launch that in the spring on Kickstarter. So if you want to learn a bit more about that, come and talk to us on the stand.